Shirley here with Sirius Talis Moon, and the moon is applying to Spica, ascendant 2 degrees Sagittarius, and midheaven applying to Ketu in Virgo. Venus is in Scorpio, and Mars is applying to Antares. Moon Day. I want to talk about certain juxtapositions happening in the sky right now because Mercury is retrograde, conjoining the ascendant, emphasizing rethinking relationships. And with the moon today, we are rethinking relationships in regarding to fairness, equity, equality, egalitarianism, and even trade. So Venus in Scorpio emphasizes deep psychological issues to do with that, and Mars in Antares is about somebody being victorious. And Mars ruling over Black Moon, Lilith, Sun, and Venus, it tells me that it could be some sort of leadership or women leadership that has to do with sexual sovereignty, also in occult or in energy. But let's talk about the juxtapositions first. With relationships, particularly now, particularly when Uranus is going through, and we will continue to see that with Uranus Gemini, where we would have two sides of the civil war having a crush on one another. And with Uranus in Taurus, at this last degree of Taurus, this is nobody talks about it, but on the low, it's an Eva Braun Hitler kind of composite, except that Eva Braun is not going with the Nazis now. Okay, and not only that, she's not into the same kink as Hitler. So now, what does it mean in praxis? In praxis, it means that whether it's about older relationship and or something that was in the past, and those themes resurface, it might also apply to new juxtapositions because the Nazi occult, or as we now know it, MK Ultra, MK Ultra, and relative, even computer interface type of programming and sorcery, that's still very much alive. And the digital fascism is still very much an issue. Okay? So a lot of people are getting, it can be juxtapositions where certain people are looking at all the positive things they could do with AI or how cameras can make for so-called safe cities, not really being exposed to or taking into account what happens when a scientist makes an actual breakthrough. Okay? And how I was having a conversation yesterday with a man, and he came from the mathematics, from the AI engineering, code writing, and he said, well, a knife can cut an apple for food, or it can cut a person's head off. And what the missing link was that if he works on code that is actually going to crack the code of something, then maybe that's why we met, because basically when when those who rule over wealth consolidation of the resources of Earth spotted talent, they don't want that person to decide whether his knife is used to cut an apple or to cut somebody's head off, and whose head and in what circumstances. But they definitely want to take advantage of each and every skill that that person's got. So what they do is they kidnap, they torture, and and they try to get the closest approximation they can to use the talents of the person and not have that person qualifying for remembering, or already have that person extorted with a shit ton of drugs. Okay. Another comment I ran into, and I always like to watch cat videos, there was a lady that had a cat, and the court decided that that cat can't leave home because their neighbors complained. So one of the comments was of a lady that lives in France, and she said, "Oh, it's too bad. There are some criminal activities that they would put bad neighbors to try to take over the estate, and it's too bad they don't have like an FBI or something in France." And this is another juxtaposition because they have ICE in the United States. And ICE is funded to do that before it invades people's houses and, shoot down pregnant moms, civilians, and all these things that are happening in Portland and other places, funneled by public money under classified projects. It does also these type of things. Um, and so these are tender form of juxtapositions where one person thinks about investments, and they think about Apple and Microsoft and Google as safe investments. Not with Uranus Gemini. Not with Uranus Gemini. Okay? Because with Uranus Gemini, we'd have to go to the rare earth mineral mining and think civil war. Because NATO is going to capitalize on that because it wants to take over the rare earth minerals. What better way to do that and present oneself as an angel is to support both sides, and the side that wins, they are sharing the dividends over the rare earth minerals and the mining. They would have to provide some human rights, but that's a small caveat in opposition to controlling the means of production of rare earth minerals and the mining of minerals and the production of technology. Okay, chip companies and so on, chips to dust, dust to water, and so on and so forth. Um, we might be drinking chips like by this time, which may be even marketed as living water. Like, I don't know if living water have chips or not, but that's something we need to pay attention to. Now, another juxtaposition is the people who actively participate in Nazi ideology, Nazi policies, extortion cults to make it impossible for women or for people to have money or to trade or whatnot. And the people that are affected by these programs that are not at all compatible for what these people have in mind. So, so those are this is why I said the divorces at the end decan of Taurus are really, really, this is the decan where we see the historical events returning of the 12 years old child that divorced the emperor. So these are juxtapositions where people run into the implications of their ideology, because Uranus is ideology. And this is regarding women, financial freedom, psychosexual ideas and thoughts, or also issues. Um, what they are invested in. Um, okay, that's basically what Uranus creates. at the last decan of Taurus, because it can either be, Nazi Hitler falling in love with Eva Braun, okay? And I don't know what it did for Eva Braun, but we'll definitely have situations that people from really, technological fascism or digital fascism um, are juxtaposed with, okay, with the people that are affected by digital fascism, namely women, for example. Um, and they run into the reality check what that would mean. That would mean that a 10 years old friendship would be abrupted without a WhatsApp because there was an energy occult ritual done by the fraternity that one of the people is a part of, or they have good friends of, and that affected them or whatnot. And that would mean that they would have to, after a long grief and sudden deaths and sudden goodbyes, say goodbye to a 10 years old friendship without even a WhatsApp. Because when one severs ties energetically, they cannot even communicate in social media. So to not be ritually abused or attacked using their content or, okay, that's an implication that nobody would prepare a person that goes with these ideas and doesn't really see a trajectory, or maybe it's before Saturn return, or okay, and that could be their Saturn return. So it can also be things that are cold case, things that were in the past. It can be all of us are rethinking our previous relationships in regarding to sexual sovereignty, because Lilith is in Scorpio, okay, and Mercury is going to go over that last decan of Scorpio, so there are going to be some closures of some really cold case relationships, okay, where people are going to have to deal with the fact that if they siphoned energy from someone and made money with that energy or made legacy with that energy, basically they have plagiarized a legacy, but also they are not really the owners of the resources as much as they think they are. Now, the third parties and programmers that made them do that, they know that, but the promised land was that if the person will agree to do so and so crimes, which sometimes it is presented as that's how they sell the family, but sometimes it's just seeing who's the cruelest of the bunch, while not really giving viable way out, okay? And yet, those crimes against humanity cannot be done. Okay, one has to defend themselves. So this is a time where the separations or the returns of old thrills of connections, whether and there is also the issue, well, like I said, MK often, MK Ultra, people trying to take the consciousness of other people. So let's say somebody has not been seeing a person for several years even. They date a new person or they meet a new person, and the old energies try to spy or to meet that person through the new person. Light talked about it, is where a person's consciousness permeates the consciousness of other people. And it's particularly for people that have gone through trauma or are susceptible which brings identity issues, psychological issues to the forefront. Okay, people won't be able to do relationships and or divorces without addressing those big issues. The Nazi occultism, the MK Ultra and MK Ultra, the ritual abuse, whether satanic or not, the currency issues, the ideologies, okay, how women treated, the and the ideologies that want to subjugate women to take their life energy or kundalini energy. And here is the thing, just at this time, there are those juxtapositions, and with the Mercury retrograde, the way people see freedom. Because just at this time, people are running into the real implication. For example, hey, that long-term bestie friend of yours, they were a Nazi for a decade, they were working with the intelligence for a decade, very likely they participated in preparing a genocide, whether they know it or not, because they could be a mind control slave, and they could be completely dissociated, or they could have several layers of consciousness, and and then they may have wanted to have more with you. Okay, so it's kind of like a reality check, or a reality check. Hey, that woman that was your friend, she wasn't thinking about you as a partner. For a partner, she would need a person that actually supports her body, mind, heart, and soul, um, and is actually compatible with her. Anything Nazi, anything Aleister Crowley, anything that goes with the esoteric Kabbalistic that goes with Aleister Crowley, okay, the particular streams that go with that type, not compatible with her. Anything that thinks they can siphon her energy and complain about debt, or complain about, bills being paid or not being paid, when they were thinking to both take the life energy to create their legacy, and to try to get that person to work in subjugation, which would get them to have typhus. Okay, people that are enslaved have typhus more. My grandfather had typhus. And by the way, those who were the caregivers for the people that had typhus died more, particularly if those caregivers enslaved the people and took their life energy and thought to present themselves as the generous caregivers, so that they caught the typhus and died from that. While my grandfather, for example, recovered. He was escaping the ghetto, which was enslavement. The partisans, which was also a type of terror. Okay, the partisans were funded by the oil companies. They raped Bulgarian women. He met them in Italy. Yes, they resisted fascism, but it wasn't like they were saints. And he had typhus, so if he would not have typhus, they would probably expect him to fight with them. And then there was a lady that let him rest, and she took care of him while he had typhus. That lady didn't die, so she wasn't doing that dumb fuckery. Um, okay, some people did die, and they weren't doing that dumb fuckery because they were susceptible and so on. But a lot of people that were thinking to siphon the energy and play themselves the benevolent caregiver died from typhus as the caregiver while the person recovered. And why would that person recover when they die? Because nobody would siphon their energy anymore, so they could recover even from typhus. There was not a hospital in the forests in Italy in 45. And as per that lady, it was pretty obvious if he would be healthy, she would probably want to hold him as a servant or as a slave in her property. Or maybe yes, maybe not. But that could have saved him also from that type of fate, so that he can continue on to Israel and have a family. Um, and this is where, okay, even when it came to my grandmother working in a factory over decades and not being able to stand on her feet anymore and having her feet amputated, I can think about what rituals were done that could have siphoned her energy and we wouldn't know about that. And the fact that she married my grandfather very young. And indeed, her granddaughter did not marry. Okay? And how was that affecting the energy siphoning? So we are rethinking relationships also on an ancestral lineage because Uranus is sextile in Saturn. Um, and Saturn is sextile in Lilith. So we are rethinking the occult, the psychological, the psychosexual, the sexual energy, the life energy, and the currency, the stability, the ability to have a long-term relationship that is actually thriving and prosperous. Okay, realistic appraisal of what it takes to have a relationship, to have a union um, that can survive even Holocausts when it's healthy. Okay, but when it's not, the slightest false flag and it's exploding into thin air because Nazi ideology, Nazi currency, um, Nazi economy is something that tends to create a bubble, and just when a person believes that they can cash in and the stock is safe, pop that bubble. And we are subjected to megalithic bubble pop in Saturn Neptune, particularly with the wave-based, the thing they use with the wave-based technologies that are used in the army. Because they are used to target individuals and they're funded by public money under classified projects. And it's happening globally. So I think we're going to have a rebellion. It's going to be the onset. It's going to be the rebellion of the targeted individuals worldwide. I didn't predict that, but now I'm thinking about it. It's a wave-based weapon technology, and there's going to be a Saturn. There's going to be a Saturn thing, so it's going to be about identity, a reality check on who were the targeted by this weapon, and this is the targeted individuals that have been targeted for decades, particularly with Chiron, particularly since 2018-19, because there would be a wound around sovereignty and a wound around identity that would cause them to be subjected to targeting. Okay? And this is also some of the juxtapositions. There could be a person that works on this development of these technologies and profiling versus a person who was a targeted individual that could have prevented an ailment that that person is dealing with, maybe after a certain shot or something. Okay, that now those implications are at the implications of Nazi occultism, digital fascism, abolition of human rights and women's rights versus life. Okay, there's no other way, because nothing to do with women necessarily. If you harm a woman, you harm also men. If you harm the men, you harm also women, unless the men were that toxic to begin with, or the women were that toxic to begin with. But to create toxic men and toxic women is usually done by Nazi ideology, so even if it's done in Africa. Now, that implication is going to set certain trajectories where people won't be able to avoid the friction that those things create. And it's not like, oh, one person is voting blue pill, one person is voting red pill, and they live together because they enjoy arguing one another. This one is not going to be like that so much. because there's going to be facing the implication of those differing ideologies in praxis. Practically, the Nazis are taking women to concentration camps. What do? The only way you have to save a woman is by trying to pretend that she is subjugated to you within the Nazi society. Do you get away from the Nazi society and escape with that woman? Or do you try to offer her an offer that she doesn't agree to because that is being with the Nazis and that is why she escaped that trajectory to begin with? Do you allow her to die at the concentration camps? Are you surprised that the woman who spoke all her life for sexual sovereignty doesn't want to be with a person that is not completely honoring her, even if it's because digital fascism that hacked his nervous system? Because before that digital fascism arrived, there were fraternities, there were brotherhoods, okay, there was a certain environment. There were many things before that technology came into being. For example, when I was writing my thesis proposal, I predicted that the technology would bridge the gap on the question of spirit and matter when it comes to the diagnosis methods of, let's say, traditional Chinese medicine. 2 years after COVID, and the technology based on machine learning arrived, and we have a medical diagnosis through the tongue, a medical diagnosis through irradiology, and the only trouble right now is, do the professional people and doctors that made this thing possible and fed the data into the computer receive fair dividends and fair royalties for their knowledge that could sustain them through the technological revolution, while enabling every computer to diagnose a person, perhaps joined by professional people. And that technology boomed, and with that, holistic hospitals even. Some of them are going to be scams. Okay, Neptune rules both hospitals, drugs, prescribed or not, scams, and real deals. Okay, it rules both the stealth wealth in Monaco and the imagery of a big real estate deal that doesn't come to fruition. That's just Neptune. There's nothing I can do about it, but understand that this is Neptune. Some people say, oh, if you allow Neptune to fool you, well, Neptune creates the loss and grief that would get people dependent on that dream, but being with the void and manifesting creates the real deal with Neptune. So, um, so this is where we see the juxtapositions, and in everyday relationships, friendships, marriages, even relationships between women. We are in the middle of a world war, and some people argue about something that could be so easily sorted out, like having a separate Olympic branch for LGBTQ people that went through gender affirming care. Like, why don't we have a separate branch for that? It has very typical. It needs its own medicine as well, because these are people dealing with both the hormones, both the sex hormones that they were born with and the sex hormones that they weren't born with. And it takes tenderness in the way certain diseases and medical conditions that are that one or other set of hormone is more susceptible to. And on the layer of that, any type of medical procedure can make one's immune system repressed. So if they had to repress immune system to do gender affirming care, okay, just like in the sports, what's the problem to have LGBTQ branch in Olympics for people that went through gender affirming care. But no, people prefer to occupy feminist discourse by turf, I think it's called, okay, turf discourse, um, and and not understand that, just like that story about that cat, that they may have put a neighbor who would litigate in court against the cat that crosses the borders. It's not even an allergic neighbor. Um, okay, then just like that, they can take any satanic, ritually abused, mind-controlled slave, put it in the ladies' room, and now everybody's talking about trans women versus cisgender women. Okay, that's instead of thinking about how their classified projects are funneled to create this chaos. Um, but chaos always brings more clarity. Those things are funded by classified projects, which is the public money. Instead of going into housing first, that is necessary to recover from trauma, into nervous system supportive housing solutions, what is for the disabled, and so on and so forth, um, to people having land so that they can have food sovereignty. But no, people prefer um, to go Nazi, and that has implications. Okay, that has implications. Um, and right now, it's a time or a transit or a Mercury retrograde when we face those implications in relationships. Okay, there was a video that I took of that I privatized, and it had to do with an energy reading where one has participated so much in Nazi ideology that the person that they have developed feelings for um, basically sees them as a Nazi. Okay, not in the dehumanization, doesn't dehumanize them, but they see them as a part of the Nazis in action or participating in Nazi actions. And the only thing that would undo that is to develop the technology to negate the technological fascism, and it goes with an ideology. Now, one line of hope. Yesterday, I saw couples that live in separate houses, and how they are way happier than couples that don't. Okay, where each person has their own safe space. For that, we need women to make. For that, we need an economy that allows people to own a house, because most of these people were owning their house. Now, the good news is that I was talking about separate housing is better for relationship with literally my mom when I was a teenager. Okay, and that means that if I had this idea as a teenager, I'm probably meant to, when Uranus now is going, my Uranus opposition will be Uranus in my fourth house, and I'm probably meant to leave that idea. Also, when I lived that idea for a while, I had to tend to other problems in the real estate, but at that time, I saw that yes, they would need a technology to, let's say, vacuum the house. That we need to resolve the minimum viable product. Yes, the guy that told me about the minimum viable product that makes our robot not clean the house when it actually could. Okay, if it was powered, but let's say there are many sorts of energies that would power it more effectively. I'm not for the nuclear one, but other types of energy, and would completely change the trajectory. And even Nikola Tesla's energy could absolutely power a vacuum cleaner, and it's completely free energy. So um, lightning strike and your house is clean. I expect dividends for that. So there are a lot of things that technology would assist in, but other than that, yes, it does do better for relationships to have separate houses. From my experience, even when I lived in shared unit, we each had our own kitchen, our own bathroom, and our own shower, even though it was douche, but it's still shower. For students, it's not bad at all, and that sustained 5 years of cohabitance. Um, um, and that is showing how architecture that favors sovereign individual independence is supporting of relationships, Venus. Okay, so identity, Mars, relationships, Venus, strong sovereignty in architecture um, is supportive of good relations. Um, and also, if the couple separates, it accommodates for that, particularly if they don't live right across the street or right next door, then they can separate fairly well, not having any finances depending on one another. And again, the law has to accommodate for that. The culture has to accommodate for that. Both of them need to be house owners. Both of them need to be able to make a life while making a living doing something that they love and that is actually of benefit to humanity. Okay, the entire world needs to change, not the trajectory of Nazis. And and it's those people that have that vision of a relationship. I remember during COVID, there was even an attempt to make me want to live in one home with a person. And I'm like, why? There is no reason to insist on that when we know that most couples divorce and anyway have to separate houses. And because everybody is asking about the children, well, if a child has 2 living rooms or 2 bedrooms in separate houses and the family is pretty much together, sharing between that houses, that house could later become one of the children instead of one household having one house to divide against, and then it sits idle because the family members, I just saw an aristocrat family video in Australia, in 60 Minutes Australia, and the boy was born first, so he inherits the house according to their aristocracy rules, and the girl will just have to move out. And the house, I think, worth 30 million or something. The boy says, as a teenager, that would be the easiest 30 million I made in my life. He wasn't even thinking to share that with his sister. If that aristocracy family had 2 homes, that would not be a problem. Boy inherits one house, girl inherits one house. And if that 2 homes would be, okay, and he only had 2 children, so when we actually want to grow children, yes, there are some families that manage to grow a lot of children and love it and are happy with that. But mostly, okay, and it's also ecosystemic. We're not booming the world with excess population manufactured by energy siphoning codes that bring children so that the children will take care of the household when they are children, and then who will inherit the land? Nobody thinks about that. It's not about the children taking care of the parents when the parents are elderly. It's about the children taking care of the parents when the parents are young and the children are young. So later, those children will not have the stamina to take care of their own children. And they would expect the child to basically take care of the parents when they are a child. That has psychological, erotic, physical, medical, and energy implications that are megalithic. So with Saturn Uranus, we're also shifting the ancestry line, shifting the beliefs, putting an end to what no longer serves, to even ideologies that no longer serve, like Nazi ideology. Okay, not to continue on a lineage with Nazi ideology. Now with Uranus, the Mercury retrogrades of Uranus, it's going to be the two sides of the civil war. Even now we are seeing how the religious component played a part into the civil war and a discussion about the Jesuits that are behind, that their extreme torture rituals are behind, funded by classified projects, are behind a lot of ICE, for example. While people call for unity, supposedly along Jesuit type of beliefs, and people are no longer, when people are wising up and expecting relationships to relationship and being realistic about it and what they need for that to happen, they no longer go with the fundamentalist cult, fundamentalist Nazi cult that sits with this or that idea, or with the creation of fundamentalist Islam versus fundamentalist Christianity. It's not suffice. It doesn't hold water. It doesn't yield happy relationships. It's not going to grow a family. It's not going to build a home. And people are looking at that. Whether these people sit in Kenya and looking at Namibia, and in the early days of industrialization, even in Singapore, versus taking a loan to repay a loan. Putting people in slavery and debt by cutting them off their resources and doing energy siphoning rituals and rapey rituals on them is not like... People are smart. I mean, did they really think they can pull it out on the Africans and the African wouldn't notice? Now, I don't know, maybe Africans invented that and the white slaves just learned from them. But, okay, maybe not. I'm not an expert on that. But that's something that we're going to pay attention to with Industrial Revolution. Uranus is also Kundalini energy. So those that would present themselves as giving fair labor rights but siphoning the energy of their employees are not going to... Meta, I'm talking about you. Tesla, I'm talking about you. Amazon, I'm talking about you. Any intelligence agency, I'm talking about you. Microsoft, I'm talking about you. It's our energy. It's not just our dividends. Very likely it's plagiarism of our ideas. And those that facilitated, that connected that with that work by Nazi occult. Okay? Oh, and this is why not a Starlink satellite, not any of the Palantir, NVIDIA, any of the companies or Israeli companies that have surveillance technologies can locate the kidnapped people. If I open my Facebook, there would be 7 to 10 cases of missing young people, old people, every single day. We have the technology to know where they are. Are they being kidnapped to have their energy siphoned to fund for the next phase of the technology, the technological fascism? Everybody knows that this is what's happening, though. It's our land, it's our food sovereignty, it's our airspace and air quality, it's our housing, it's our medicine that actually medicines, not something that somebody puts something in that powder that calls it probiotics, and maybe it's probiotics and maybe it's another powder. Met a young developer. As we meet and talk, drink coffee and so on, suddenly that person has a sugar drop. And I'm like, this is a young person. They're athletic, they're eating well. Why did they have a sugar drop? Perhaps I don't know what they're working on, with those codes and programming. There can be confidentialities. But I saw that something hacked into his nervous system as we sit, and suddenly he has a moment, and I see in that moment certain faces that some of them I might even recognize. So I see, hey, that person is somehow targeted individuals. Does he even know that? There would be no reason for him to have a sugar drop. I mean, I'm hot, but not. Maybe I'm drop dead gorgeous, but Um, and I have no idea what is it that they develop, because there's confidentiality. I'm not gonna probe into what a person programs. Um, but it was a good reason for me to suspect that that person is beginning to be targeted individual, and had not the slightest of the clue of what targeted individual even is. Okay? Now I know these phenomena.